So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, as we have people from different continents and people are still entering in the room. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm Isolina Boto, I work for COLEAD, and I'm very pleased to have another session today with our colleagues from OECD in Paris as part of our fruits and vegetables industry series. And today for a very, very important topic, which is the food fraud and all the context and the consequences and impact it has on the industry. Not only, of course, is a big problem per se, but it's also undermining many of the SDGs, is a big problem for the industry, the public services, the authorities, of course, the consumers, as we all are. So it's a very exciting one, just because, of course, we are all responsible at different levels to fix it a bit. So very pleased to be with you today. Before anything, please check that you have choose your language. The session today is in French and English. So if you go at the bottom of your screen, you have a little globe, and there you can choose your language, and you can keep that for the overall session. I want to tell you as well that the session is recorded. That recording will be shared afterwards, that all the PowerPoints will be available as well after the session and share widely. So do not panic if you miss anything or graphs or anything important, because you will get it afterwards. I will not do the introduction now because we have colleagues today from OECD and COLEAD. We will give you some insights before, of course, our keynote speakers. Without major delay, I'm always very pleased to, of course, to introduce our counterparts, OECD, and in particular, Jose Brambilla Macias, who is the program manager at the Trade and Agriculture Directorate, at the Agricultural Codes and Schemes at OECD. So he has a very strong economic background. He's specialized in development economics. Before joining OECD, he worked on the research part, University of Reading in the UK, but also as expert in the FAO trades and market divisions, OECD, as well as the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So he has really a strong expertise on that. And just very quickly, the objectives of this series today, you would have seen that is number 6, that we launch are really to share knowledge on markets and operators, to understand a bit more the sector, but of course, how it contributes to sustainable production and consumption, to promote the contribution of fruits and vegetables to healthy and nutrition diets, and to showcase as well innovations of private sector operators across the EU, but also in southern countries, and lessons learned, including, of course, for the important topic of today. So please, Jose, thanking you again for being with us this morning. You have the floor.
Thank you, Selina. Thanks to COLEAD, to our colleague friends, for co-hosting this webinar. Thanks to Jeremy Knobs, of course, for all the support and all that COLEAD team. I want to welcome all of you to this session on food fraud. As Isolina already mentioned, I work for OECD, and in particular, we have what we call the OECD Fruit and Vegetable Scheme, where we deal with the inspection of fruit and vegetables, the quality of fruit and vegetables. We have a network in Europe, in Africa, for example, of inspectors. In Africa, we deal a lot with Kenya, with Morocco, with South Africa. In Latin America, we deal with Brazil. We deal with countries far away, like New Zealand, with Turkey as well. And often our inspectors are faced with food fraud. One example recently that we had is that our inspectors at the European Union were checking a shipment of potatoes. These potatoes were entering from outside the European Union. So everything was fine, the quality was fine, all the documents were fine, but there was something that caught the attention of the inspector. And it was that this shipment, the origin of these potatoes, was written France. So this inspector was, he thought, how is it possible that French potatoes are entering from outside the European Union? So of course they checked. They started asking more questions, more proofs of the origin of this shipment of potatoes. And it turned out, of course, that it was not France. It was from a third country outside the European Union. But why people will lie about the origin of these potatoes? Well, there are two reasons. The first is price. They know they could sell at a higher price, the potatoes, because French potatoes have a reputation in the market. And the second, somehow they were trying to avoid compliance with, for example, the use of chemicals for producing these potatoes. You know, in Europe, there are very high standards that are not necessarily followed outside Europe. So you see, they were trying to make fraud, you know, to do fraud with these potatoes. So this is just one simple example of how things operate, how fraud can affect us all. So it was unfair competition for the French producers of potatoes. It can mislead the consumer. It might have health consequences for all of us. So we will be discussing with three experts today. And I think they will share with us their examples and how they deal with food fraud in a daily basis. So with this, I pass the floor to Jeremy Knox. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you very much, Jose, for this introduction and for your partnership, which is very, very important. So yes, indeed, Jeremy will tell a bit more about COLEAD, the organization I work with, a non-for-profit association of private sector operators. Jeremy Knox is our DG at COLEAD, but before that, he had a lot of experience on export markets in different continents, actually, around the world. And also private standards and certification. And you would, for those who know COLEAD, who is a big part of our audience as well, you know that we have a long-standing experience and work on the food safety issues, on the food and sustainable diets and food, and of course, supporting the private sector, but also working with all the ecosystem, supporting the entrepreneurs. So Jeremy, if you want to give a few remarks, and you forgot also to tell us that today is your birthday. So happy birthday. Thanks for giving the time to us on such a day.
Thank you very much, Isolina, and thank you, Jose. It's always a pleasure, of course, to see you. I'd like, of course, first to welcome everybody to this sixth session, and thank, of course, all of you participants, but also, of course, fellow panelists for taking the time for being with us, and of course, OECD and OECD colleagues for this fruitful collaboration, which is, among other, leading us to this sixth session. But of course, our collaboration goes beyond. So as Isolina noted, as a very quick reminder, COLEAD, we are a private sector not-for-profit association, and our mission has been updated about a year ago. It has been updated a year ago, in line also with the evolution of our name, because formerly we were COLEAD ECP. And to be defined today as really making sure we're enhancing that through our activities, we're enhancing the contribution of agri-food systems to achieving SDGs. And in that context, in practice, the way we're doing this is thanks to the support from donors, amongst which, of course, the European Union, the OECPS, the AFD, NABEL, and others. We set up programs. We've historically been setting up programs broadly, which can be regrouped under the terminology of technical assistance programs to agri-food operators, and mainly throughout Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. But today, some of these programs have a broader outreach. And the common denominators of all these programs has been to support access to markets, being access to international export markets, regional, domestic markets, and to do that in a sustainable framework. Of course, in that respect, as it has been introduced by Jose and by Isolina, food fraud is of course an extremely important issue, and not only from a market access perspective, but more broadly, from from a perspective of really having agri-food systems fully contributing to SDGs. Today, with the overall evolution of regulation, of course, some first elements that come to mind are consumer health and food security, nutrition, but also, of course, when it comes to the social compliance side or even environmental protection, these are important elements to keep in mind. Now, historically, I could say that our activities and actions in terms of course, and without confusing non-compliance and food fraud, but have been geared at three distinct levels that we consider are contributing, of course, to fighting food fraud. On the first place, it's really about informing the what, the how, the when, the why of to do things or not to do things, and supporting really a structural and systemic upgrade and change throughout agri-food system in terms of practices, in terms of processes. And so that's at a very macro level. At a meso level, a very important aspect of our work, and it's one of the most challenging parts of our work, is the work we do around the public-private dynamics, dialogues, and in the different countries where we operate, and especially when it comes to tackling some specific issues that are affecting particular value chains. And why is it so important to put public and private sectors around the same table to discuss some issues that are affecting the value chain, being on the compliance side or on others? Is that we believe that it is only by bringing, of course, both sectors together around the table that sustainable solutions can be put in place, and that most importantly, you start developing really a sense of the collective responsibility, ownership, interest in mitigating, of course, the impacts of having some operators that are simply not following the same rules or the rules of the game, because at the end of the day, it will negatively impact not only, of course, the individuals and the products in itself, but also the entire reputation, or can potentially impact the entire reputation, of course, of an origin, of a product, and even more broadly of a country. And the third level we work out, of course, is through direct technical assistance and training that is being provided, both at kind of production processing side, being on enhancing traceability systems, putting in place internal auditing, but also, of course, with competent authorities to have the systems in place. But one important element I would like to remind here on this regard is that, of course, we have the technicalities and some technical aspects, but it is also going, of course, into the domain of being good business partners and the ethical area of course, how we believe collectively and individually we should act responsibly. And in that sense, of course, all our activities today that are performed through the programs that are funded by donors are conditioned by the commitment that operators make beforehand on engaging really on a continuous improvement path on what we have set up as a sustainability charter. And one of the first elements in that sustainability charter directly concerns the fact of being good business partners, which okay can sound a bit simple as it is expressed, but of course is extremely important in terms of overall mindset. So in summary, a couple of years ago, we tried to define our activities and conceptualize them, and we came up with these 3 T's: the true, transparent, and trustful value chains. And if we don't have the true, transparent, and trustful value chains, we feel that the conditions are not in place to have those value chains fully contributing to having an enhanced sustainability on all fronts, on people, planet, and for shared profit. So thank you all, of course, for being with us today. I won't be any longer. I wish everybody a fruitful session, and again, thank you to everybody for being here with us today, and to fellow panelists. Looking forward to listening to you. Thank you. Iselina, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And for those who want to know more from OECD and COLEAD, please check also in the chat some of the links that are shared with my colleagues.
Without further ado, we are going to go to our speakers now. Thank you very much. Mr. Marin, I know you're very busy. You're Deputy Head of Unit G5, Alerts, Traceability and Committee, and you're also the coordinator of the EU Food Fraud Network. On the basis of what Jeremy has told us about information communication, this is of course an essential element, and this tells us about the importance of sharing information in that workshop. You are a doctor in veterinary medicine from the University in Lyon. You have worked on animal health, on fraud, fight with Olaf, and you will tell us more about that. You have worked on the audit of the implementation of the food safety legislation, and you coordinate the unit that is in charge of fighting fraud. Prior to that, you were working for the French Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you for telling us a few words about what food fraud is at the European level. As Jeremy said, our food system is one of the safest in the world. Thank you very much for sharing with us about food fraud, the systems that have been implemented at European level and the legislation that has been adopted, and that should be sources of inspiration for other countries in the world. Thank you very much for telling us a few words, and I encourage the participants to write their questions in the chat. Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. It is an excellent opportunity for us to tell you a few words about what we are doing in the fruit and vegetable sector. You see the title. The title is already a sign of a drastic change that has been made in the European Union 10 years ago when the Horse-Gate took place. Why was it a turning point in fraud fighting? It is not that there was no fraud before that, but for the first time ever, we experienced the Horse-Gate, a case in which beef was replaced by horse meat that was cheaper, and that was an economic profit for operators. But it was the first time that we'd experienced a major crisis with consumers and companies that would not affect public health. It was an exclusively economic case of fraud that that had very strong consequences for the economic sector. And this is the reason why we felt the need for intensifying our fighting measures, and more specifically against that type of fraud. I'm not going to go dwell too long on these pieces of legislation. We've got the General Food Law, which is a piece of legislation on general food aspects, and we also have an official framework for official controls, on the basis of which the food fraud network was set up. We're going to come back on this later on. Second slide, our legislation is based on three main principles. First, the operators are responsible for what they market, which is a very important element. The competent authorities in third countries and member states are to ensure adequate and effective controls in their countries, and the Commission, that European Commission that I represent, is guarding the treaties and the legislation to make sure that the EU member states properly enforce the legislation. It is important to understand that the European Commission doesn't have a mandate to investigate and to carry out investigations on food fraud in the different member states. This is a competence from the member states themselves. The legislation foresees or covers all sectors in the food chain, starting from food stuff, animal welfare, feed, to the food products themselves, so quality certification, health, plant health, animal health, phytosanitary products, and others.
Let us now move to this very famous network, which was set at the time of the Horse-Gate. It's called the Food Fraud Network. This network is an administrative network. It does not have any judicial authority or power. As I mentioned earlier, the European Commission does not have investigative power and certainly no other power in that field. But in Europe, we have two organizations that are responsible for law enforcement, i.e. we have Europol. From a judicial point of view, we have Eurojust, which coordinates judicial investigations. So in fact, the EU Agri-Food Fraud Network, which you can see here on the left of this slide, and the Food Fraud Network works together with other bodies which can coordinate and talk together in a way. Now, here in detail, the Alert and Cooperation Network. As I mentioned, you have the fraud, the food feed fraud, but we also have the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, the RASFF, which is directly involved in public health issues. We have another network, which is a network to which we send information which concern non-compliance with our system, but without there being any consequences regarding public health. And the third part was the fraud notification. Right, here, what can we see? We have some results for 2023. What it means is that in terms of notification, the RASF, which concerns public health issues, we have close to 5,000 notifications on a yearly basis, which means that member states exchange information and they may recall, withdraw products. Then you have the AAC notification, about 3,000 notifications. There again, member states are exchanging information concerning compliance or non-compliance. And then you have other non-compliances which member states have already considered as suspicious of fraud, 758 Agri-FF notifications. Let us move to the next slide. And let us see how at the level of the European Union, we can determine whether or not there is a fraud. Now, of course, the first element is non-compliance with the legislation or with the law. Now, that was one aspect. In terms of customers, we're not talking about consumers, actually. It could be the businesses or the industry in general, or individuals, of course. So that's why we talk about deception of customers. Now, the other element is the economic gain, i.e. the fraud intends to obtain economic gain. And then you have to prove the intention, of course. Now, there's one thing which will come back, and I'd like to mention the fact that why do we need to identify if there is non-compliance, and how do we need to determine its fraud? Well, the reason is that the inspection and the control methods must follow a different pattern. Now, if you observe a non-compliance, possibly the non-compliance can be rectified within the HRFPCP. Now, if on the other hand, you observe a non-compliance with the legislation, it could be that the company involved will find a parallel means or another way of actually obtaining an economic gain. And this company does not intend to change. In other words, the inspection will be obliged to inspect those companies which are truly fraudulent. So you need to have more specific attention to those aspects. Now, here you have the number of notifications which were exchanged within the Agri-Food Fraud Network. And you can see that over the years, progressively, there is an increase. Now, this does not essentially mean an increase in terms of frauds, but certainly the intention given by the competent authorities in order to combat fraud in the food sector in Europe has increased. Next slides. Here, I think this is really very interesting. It's very recent. Last February, the European Commission started producing a report on notifications relating to fraud suspicions. And this monthly report from now on will be produced on a monthly basis. So I mentioned the ACC non-compliance, the RASFF with actually public health aspect. And we have gathered about 9,000 notifications on a yearly basis, and we're going to check which can be fraud. Now, this information had already been organized at authority level for the past 6 years, but now this information is going to be published and distributed to all operators so that they become involved and understand what has been identified as being potential fraud. What it means is that companies will be able to assess the risk for their own company, and as far as authorities are concerned, they might consider to focus on certain aspects for the controls, especially in those areas where there is a lot of fraud. Now, I'd like to submit a question to you, and please think about it during my presentation. If you were to identify the fraud which in your country or in your region has had the greatest impact from the point of view of public health, what would it be? I'm talking about a specific event. And regarding the consequences for public health, my question to you is, what is or would be the sector to be controlled? Because there are a lot of impact. There's a lot of impact from the point of view of public health, and that's important. Please do use the chat to give your comments or ideas. I will refer to the major event in the EU regarding public health and the consequences. It's important to highlight what, from a point of view of public health, is really concerning. Right, now, this is being prepared for you specifically with a fruit and vegetable. Now, based on the monthly report you have seen in the previous slide, you saw that in January, there were 725 notifications in the IRASF network through our 3 networks, and we identified 227 suspicions of fraud. They were not necessarily fraud, suspicions of fraud, but it needs more targeted inspection. And what we've observed is that the suspicion of fraud concerns mainly pesticides, the use of pesticides. And here, inspection, more thorough inspection is required. Now, you can see there were 129 suspicion of fraud for pesticides, and 100 of them had their origin from non-member countries, which are also called third countries. Anyway, here you can see the so-called top 5 pesticides, and you find chlorpyrifos as number 1. We've had quite a number of notifications from Egypt and Turkey. And as far as the products are concerned, we're talking about lemons mainly, grapefruit, peppers. Okay, next slide, please. Now, it is important to realize that at European level, we use the Joint Research Center, the JRC, which has published a report which is certainly very interesting for competent authorities. The idea is to determine what are good practices for the implementation of the rules. And I just wanted to highlight the work of the GRC and their technical report. And we also need to strengthen controls wherever we believe there are risks. What it means is that some countries and some products are more focused upon. And indeed, due to suspicion of fraud from those countries, we have focused our research and our inspection. We have a reference center at the level of the European Commission. This is a knowledge center for food fraud and quality. It enables us to analyze better. And we call upon the Knowledge Center for Food Fraud and Quality when we want to go beyond in terms of checking and quality checking. Here are a series of coordinated actions which were set up in the past few years since the Knowledge Center was set up. Now, you can see that in different areas, we have been able to set up some activities. The latest was about honey. You find all of this information on our website. Now, we also work on the illegal trade of cats and dogs. And from now on, we'll talk about adding water to seed products. This is something which fraudsters have already understood. Now, this is really interesting. Now, we are working together with the European police services or police services from third countries, even non-member countries, and working together with those, it gives us some good approach for certain areas and certain frauds. Now, for example, adding sugar in honey was focusing on honey imports, and we noted that 45% of the products that were tested with the most up-to-date research techniques, thanks to the JRC, were a lot of fraud suspicions. Now, here you find all the results. You can check these websites, and if you have more interest in this. Just some information about the so-called operations. You must know it can take quite a long time, 6 months to 1 year to get ready from a technical point of view, and then over a year to actually set up the operation, plus the ensuing investigations, and then generally speaking, the action plan for honey, for example, took a long time. This was a timeline. And what are the results? Well, a lot of samples were taken over a given period. And as I mentioned earlier, a great number of non-compliance were observed, i.e. fraud suspicions, and various operators, importers were also targeted. So that continues. Let me say a few words about the international outreach. The monthly report you saw earlier, i.e. the one published in February, was based on notifications issued in January. And this monthly report will continue being produced on a monthly basis. It is based on standards from the CEN, the European Standardization Committee, and the CEN has actually given a very specific category list of different types of fraud. So it's very interesting. We now have a classification of the types of fraud. Now, you must also know that the Codex Alimentarius also works on definition of fraud, and we hope that this year, in 2024, we will end up, in 2025, we will have a more specific definition of food fraud, and that will be included in the Codex Alimentarius. These are a few conclusions. Well, as you can see, fraud at European level and in all European countries is increasingly important for control authorities. I believe that all authorities are aware of the risk, not so only for consumers, but also for the brands. And that is why we are developing more methodologies to detect and deter food fraud. It's not easy, but fraudsters are always working a little bit in front of us, but we're trying to catch up. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you very much to COLEAD for their invitation. Thank you for inviting us to present what the European Union is doing in the terms of fighting fraud. Thank you so much, Mr. Marin. This was a very interesting presentation. Thank you for telling us what the EU is doing in terms of fighting fraud. In the chat, we've indicated the links, and of course, you can have some information in the documents prepared by COLEAD, and our colleagues will also provide a link to all the work organized in terms of food fraud. There is a link and some information you can find. You can consult this. Thank you very much. I think that your question was very interesting. And to all of you who want to
I would like to introduce Mr. Salvatore Alberino. He's joining us from Rome. He's an inspector from the Italian Directorate General for Preventing and Combating Agri-Food Fraud. So he's a specialist on that. We wanted to know what is the work of an inspector, to better understand what it implies, and to deduct as well what kind of training, knowledge, information you should have. I mean, the operators and others should have, of course, without being specialized, but the minimum that you can understand the food fraud, which is different from the food safety, even if there are links, but really the food fraud. So you have carried out, you were in the past expert at the Central Fraud Repression Inspectorate of Italy, of course. You have carried, of course, a high number of inspection activities, mainly dealing with controls in the oil sector, wine sector, the protection of products of registered names, which is, of course, a huge, as Mr. Marin said, a huge part, because it's where you make the money economically as well. And you work a lot also with the authorization of control bodies and approval of control plans for protected designation of origin, protected geographical indications, and traditional specialty guaranteed, and organic farming products, which are, of course, very important. And again, that's where Europe is leading as well in terms of quality and branded products. So thank you very much in advance for sharing your experience with us. Mr. Alberino, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. I will share my presentation. Okay. First of all, I want to thank the organizer for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to present my department. I work for the Central Inspectorate for the Control Fraud, but it's too long a complicated name. Just let's call ISQRF. When you will have the material, if you go on this link, you can see a very short video about us while we are working. Okay, who we are. Usually, I like to say in very easy way, we are the right hand of the Minister of Agriculture. Officially, we are the most important technical control body of the Minister of Agriculture for the quality and the labeling products, but also for technical means like pesticides, like feed, seeds, fertilizer, etc. We are responsible for the official control according to the regulation 625/2017, but we also work as police under the public prosecutor. We issue fines or other kind of section when we find problems. I say other kind of section because the section cannot be only money, but also, for example, obliged to publish the news on some newspaper or close some activity or obliged to change the presentation of the products, etc. As Isolina said, we are also involved in authorized control body and approval control plan for PGO, PGI, and organic products, which for Italy is very huge business, very important products. Finally, since 2 years, we are also involved in unfair practices. I want to say just a few words. Since our inspectorate was born, we are involved in business to consumers control, business to consumers market. Our scope was protect the consumers. But since 2 years, we got another task, another responsibility, and try to make a little bit of order in business to business market. I will say a few words later. This is our organization. We are 3 Directorate General in Rome, but also office all over Italy. That's why we can cover all the Italian territory. We also have 6 laboratories to make analysis. How we work? According to the officer control, we have a plan of the number of control we do each year. And this plan is made on risk analysis. So we check our reports in the past and we can say what are the sectors with most risk, but also our control, our program is based on specific reports that can become from other authority or other country. As the colleagues said before, we don't work only at Italian level, but also at European and not European level, since we are the competent authority according to the regulation 1151 for PGO and PGI products, but also we are a liaison body for regulation 273 is a wine. In other words, we are the contact point in case of European connection to share our experience and to help each other. When we say officer control, means our activity must be based on risk analysis, as I said before, but also that we can check products, but also operators at any stage. I mean, producer, transformation, marketing, etc. We must have a huge transparency. So we have procedures, we write report, we publish our report, and so on. We of course use official analysis, technical analysis, and so on. Here is just a very simple example of our procedures to make control, which has a double scope. The first one to be transparent in what we do, but also is a guideline for our inspectors that can remember everything must be checked. Our controls can be documental, can be physical when we go exactly in place. We can make analytical control, but also we are focusing a lot on online control. When I say online control, I have 2 meanings. The first one meaning, I mean traceability and origin tools means in Italy we have some online register where all producer must insert some data. So when we go in the factory or in the office, we can just log in this register and check the quality, the traceability, the label, and etc. Another kind of traceability of control is isotopic analysis, which is very important because we can, through the analysis of the product, we can be sure about the origin of the products, especially for wine products is very, wine and olive oil products is quite important for us. But when I say online, I say another meaning, also another meaning, the second one, means we have some memorandum of understanding with some important marketplace like Amazon, eBay, Rakuten, Alibaba. So thanks to this memorandum, we can control all over the world, we can say, because if we find something online, we have a way, we have some tool to cut down some insertion and stop the fraud. Here, just a couple of examples. In this case, this product was sold in Switzerland. Of course, we are Italian inspector and we cannot go in Switzerland and control, but thanks to this memorandum of understanding, we could cut off this spot, this market. And in this case, it was some olive oil that was evoking Riviera DOP Ligure, which is a PGO product. We don't defend only Italian products. We defend also products from other countries. And here we have another example. This, in this case, they were selling, they were evocating feta, which is a Greek cheese, Parmesan, which is Italian cheese, Gouda, which is Netherlands cheese. It was a fake, and thanks to our action, we could stop and remove this insertion. The last case that I have here is someone that was selling balsamic vinegar, and he was calling aceto balsamico di Modena. Also in this case, it was not the true product, and we stop. So when we say online control, we also meaning about the marketing. But as I said before, since a couple of years, we moving our activity also on business to business market. What means business to business is any relation between two enterprises. Why it's important? Because sometimes one of this company has too much power and is not correct in the relation with other company, and they try to cheat. They try to take advantage of their power. We start to investigate, and thanks to our legislation, we can stop many cases. Some of these cases are absence of written contracts. Of course, if there is no written contracts, the producer cannot how to say, cannot make justice and respect fact. Other case, one of company didn't pay in time or according to the deadlines. They pay much time later, or they just give back the products without pay. Of course, this is unfair practice that make problems in the producer chain. How we find out this case? It's just the first year that we get this product, this activity, and we have two ways to find out our cases. The first one is on our website. We can just report people, every kind of people can report us a case and we start the investigation. But another way, thanks to the Italian Economic Institute, we study the economic chain, and we can see the price of the raw materials, and we can have an idea where is the problem, and we can start our investigation. My time is finished. I just give a few idea of our works, and thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and complementary presentation as well. We learn a lot. We already have actually questions that we will come back to the end to them. You know, the checklist of audit, the methodology of investigation, a lot on trainings, of course, and on sharing as well with stakeholders like farmers and beyond the NPPOs and the country officials. But without major delay, what we can do now is just have our last presenter, who is coming from Africa, from Benin.
Mr. Francis de Soussognon is the founder of Agrosphere in Benin. He's got a long experience in digital transformation in France, where he worked in the banking system. And as many entrepreneurs, we welcome. He's someone who wants to take part in the evolution of his country, his continent, and wants to solve problems or develop solutions to food fraud, because you can imagine that it is a serious problem in Europe, but even more so in Africa for the lack of data. Francis, you are the co-founder of Acumen Network, a digitization company that supports private companies, public bodies, and NGOs in their digital transformation. And as you will tell us, and of course, in 1.5 hours, we can't tell about too many success cases, but in the note that we have handed over, we have mentioned that digital tools can contribute to fighting food fraud, because they are an incentive for a higher level of transparency and sustainability. And without further ado, thank you, Mr. Dossou, for joining us from Benin. You've got the floor. Thank you very much, Isolina. Thanks to all of you. I'm delighted to have been invited and to have been given the opportunity to explain what I do with my team within our company, Agrosphere, how we assist the actors in the food value chain, how we help them fight fraud. I'm going to share my screen. I hope it's going to work. I'll first quickly introduce Agrosphere, what it is, what are the services we provide, what is our approach to the services. And in the second part, I will tell you about a few practical examples of experience, of cases we've been faced with, and the solutions we are developing. Agrosphere is an agri-tech company which mission is to sustainably assist African farmers and their customers, mostly industrialists, help them improve their practices on a permanent basis. And our premise is that the producer and small farmer cooperatives have to improve the quality and quantity to meet the demand of a market which is always stricter and more geared at low respect and compliance. We will work on 2 pillars. First, production from harvesting to marketing, and the access to markets, where we work on the relationship between the small farmer cooperatives and the other actors. It is an activity that we implement in different value chains, cereals, beans, nuts, fruit and vegetable. How did we implement the approach? We want to support actors from one end of the value chain to the other. We check the performance of agricultural operators, and we are working on a model with 3 different actors: farmers and cooperatives, governments, NGOs, and the 3rd pillar is industrial buyers. Industrial buyers are all the actors that require high volumes of produce for export or import purposes. And what we try to do is give support from one end of the value chain to the other on our proprietary platform. We will assist farmers from the very beginning, getting to know the producer. We then map the plots. We accompany or support campaign and campaign follow-up, the traceability and certification process, and the digital marketplace is also a sphere in which we work. We try to bring together supply and demand and facilitate transactions between producers and manufacturers. Earlier on, Isolina talked about tools, and this is what our approach consists in. Our technology is an innovation toolbox that contains different tools, and another 2 tools will join that box in a few weeks. Then those are defined on the basis of the needs of our customers in the field of production and aggregation. We will support the mastering of agricultural production and crop aggregation. And about sourcing and processing, we want them to know what is available and when. It is a toolbox that you see here. It is a mobile application and another application that will give a technological follow-up of what's happening in the field. You see, we've got satellite images, and that gives us the possibility to grant or to provide an end-to-end support. We currently focus on Africa, production support to farmers, and we also work on the access to markets to industrial operators in Africa and outside the African continent. To support those activities and to try and reach our aim, we are present right now in Western Africa. We will open in the Democratic Republic of Congo this year, and we would also like to expand to Central Africa. We are trying to expand our network. We already work with 30,000 farmers and 1,000 operators, industrialist operators that I will explain later on. A few examples, 4 cases of fraud prevention, examples of the way our tools and technologies help prevent fraud. I'll show you these 4 cases that have to do with aggregation of follow-up cases, the control of volumes collected, the end-to-end tracing of anomalies, and these last functionality, which is certification in one click. That is a very interesting tool for fighting fraud. The first example, follow-up of aggregations. We are here in an industrial relationship, a cooperative in Benin. It is about the export of cashew nuts that are exported to Belgium and distributed by a European operator. The cooperative network is called URCPA. The difficulty was to have a greater visibility and make sure that the volume arriving at industrial site matches the consumer demands. There were sometimes gaps and an imbalance between what the cooperative had aggregated in the different warehouses and what was demanded. So our approach is to digitize the operation of the cooperative in order to see how they aggregate inputs. We have piloted the agricultural activities and raised awareness as to the planning of the different activities, from the harvesting to the supply to industrial sites, etc. We have now digitized that, and we also consider the industrial side. When cashew nuts arrive in warehouses at any point in time, they are able to trace back the producer of one given bag of cashew nuts. And it is a traceability that ends with the final product, or almost, when cashew nuts have been cleaned, they've been conditioned and placed in bags. And is then being marketed. At that point, we are still able to trace back the problems at all levels. Who is the producer of this cashew nut? Who is the what cooperative has marketed it, etc. So this is a first step, but that enables us to work and to work fruitfully. And you see here what's happening in the Ivory Coast. We're working in a network with Dr. Bronner that gets his supply from a women organic cocoa producer called Cani that is certified, and the German manufacturer has got a high level of traceability requirements. And the problem we've got there is that when it comes to aggregation, farmers were trying to supply higher volumes that was what was required. So this is a certified value chain, and the producer knows that the cocoa product he is marketing through that channel will bring him a 30% profit, and will then try to supply Dr. Bronner cocoa that has been certified. Once again, what we have done with our technical tools,
this specific aggregation mechanics, and at this stage, we were able to detect. What we did was actually to determine at the beginning of the growing season what the quantity of nuts would be, for example, or cocoa, 700 kilos per hectare, for example. And having actually provided this estimate, we're going to follow up different events that could have a positive or a negative impact on the harvesting. And when we actually recoup the cocoa bags from this farmer, we'll be able to be alerted when we reach 80% of the capacity. And from that stage on, we will be very attentive to whatever product is being actually put into the system, because at that stage, we will become very vigilant, and the inspectors will check what the farmer will introduce into the system. In other words, when you've reached the expected capacity, we will become very vigilant. And if we see that there is increasing capacity, there is more capacity coming in, then we will become very vigilant and make some checks. This is another case where this system will enable the cooperative and also the industrialist who buys the produce to check that there is no cocoa coming from a different area, from a different origin that may pollute the work which has taken place during the growing season. Another case of end-to-end tracing I would like to present here relates to Senegal with a customer which is SAF Ingrédients, and they're working with about 1,200 small farmers. The idea is actually to work with these small farmers and export to the European food market. And we are talking about the onion sector in Senegal. So we're talking about 1,200 small farmers in the northern Senegal. And the idea was to have a sort of end-to-end visibility on the production system. And here too, we have a tool. We digitize the cooperative. We will give some specific information to all members. We map the plots, and we also organize or make sure that the information is very clear. We have a sort of 360 view of all activities from end to end. And what is specific with this SAF Ingrédients is that we have a system enabling us to have good traceability data and also data from the field, i.e., when we make some inspections on the field, we are more informed about the possibility for remuneration of the different actors. What it means is that we're making sure that the supply is well taken care of. There is good visibility on the supply of what comes from the farmers, and all the produce has been actually traced, and there are no losses, no thefts during the supply chain. The last case I wish to present to you is something which took place in Benin. FENACOPAB is a fruit cooperative bringing together over 3,000 pineapple growers. And amongst these pineapple growers, about 1,000 of them are GAP certified. The global GAP certification is quite cumbersome to obtain and to maintain, because what it means is that on a yearly basis, you have to prove that you're actually applying good agricultural practices. And what it means is you've got to gather some data. Now, so far, the data was handwritten and it was a little bit complicated. And but this data was used to fill in the Excel models. Now, what we did with this cooperative was to actually digitize the cooperative with member profiling and mapping of the plots. There were 7 stages of renewing the certificates, and we have actually provided on a digital basis the certificate, and it's much easier now. In other words, in the past, whenever there was an audit period or a certification audit period, the team of the cooperative had to work and dedicate about 4 weeks of their time just doing that, just making sure that the GAP certificates were actually reproduced. So now, just clicking on the computer, the cooperative can deal with the certification. So from 4 to 5 weeks, where the whole team, 5, 6, 7 people were involved at full-time. Well, just by organizing the data, we are able for them, for the cooperative to use the computer. So these are 4 practical instances where our tools or solutions were made available to these cooperatives and also to the industrialists. So it's really important. You know that we have a lot of small farmers, and of course we have some difficulties, but now we have identified all these farmers, and this is a very preventive approach. I think it's very useful. And to end, before we go to the Q&A period, I'd like to say that we've had 3 years of working together. We have set up a network of partners. We are present essentially in Africa because, as I mentioned, we work in the field with the cooperatives and with the small farmers, but we overall have a network of partners in Africa, but also in Europe, because we're talking about the 2 different markets which are represented in the trade we're dealing with. And together with these industrialists, we're making sure they have sustainability and traceability for all the products they are buying. Here you have an example of all the partners. I'm quite certain that you know some. Now, this slide is already a few weeks old and some partners are missing, but we are really doing quite well in terms of partnership. It was very interesting that this network was set up in Africa with a good knowledge of the African market. And at the same time, we know what is needed in Europe. And this is how I developed this aspect. I have some experience from the banking sector, and I've used my experience from the banking sector, and I used it in the agricultural sector. And I stress the aspect of compliance and traceability. I think that's really important. So this is where I end my speak. Thank you so much, Francis, for giving us some insight how the operators and small farmers can actually take part in the food chain and how fraud can be actually erased in a way. And certainly your approach is prevention and a better traceability of the better traceability, better prevention. I think this is true.
We take now
in a
quickly
lot of areas.
some questions. Thank you very much for the questions you put in the chat. Thank you, Mr. Marin, for some. You have already put some resources as well online. I will go on the same way we started, the same order of speakers, because the time is a bit running. So the questions, for example, for Italy is, are there any current possible analyses that can help to identify the origin of an olive oil? I know, being Spanish, that olive oil is a big fraud, problem, potentially. And now is the fight against fraud carried out in the case of, for example, vegetables oils or something like that? We have many also kind of questions on how the interceptions, for example, from Tanzania, who normally, are notified through the NPPO official, at the country level, can be shared as well more widely with the stakeholders, for example, smallholders and others. How can this information, benefit? Do you have is there a methodology of investigation of suspicions of fraud when it's a fraud to the pesticides? I think Mr. Marin said that also in his presentation, but perhaps you can just elaborate or give some examples. A lot of interest on the trainings. Do we have trainings on food fraud online or just trainings? And if we can share some of the resources or the information. And also can the EU, does the EU disclose as well the frauders, I mean, those that are responsible of a fraud, like the US Food and Drug Administration does, for example. I think you share some documents as well. But please, we start by Mr. Marin. And of course, if Jose, Jeremy, any of you has additional questions, please come in, alert me. If not, we start by Mr. Marin, Mr. Alberino, and then Mr. Dossou. Monsieur Marin.
Thank you. Yes, I can see there are a great number of questions in the chat. Let me try and sum up. Let me start with the name of the companies. That's always an interesting aspect. Let me just briefly remind you of a major event which took place in Europe concerning germinating seed, which led to death in Europe due to contamination. And very soon, it were companies selling cucumbers which were actually touched with huge drops of sales and great economic consequences for the sector. So could I just say that you have to be very careful with denunciations. That's my first point. Let me just remind you of the fact that a fraud will be checked by justice. It is not the administration which checks whether fraud is true. We're always talking about a suspicion of fraud. Of course, at an administrative level, you can actually issue a sanction, and that might be the end. But if you go to justice, then there is a possibility, and this is true also if you want to contest some fraud accusation. So if the information is provided too fast on the social networks or worse, online by the European Commission, that would be very, very dangerous. What we feel is important is to alert control authorities, alert operators, without giving any names, but providing some information regarding the sector that is being targeted. And the monthly report, which is issued on a monthly basis by the Commission, will provide you some insight in this. And you can have access to the monthly report. There's one information on chlorpyrifos. Sorry, one question to me about chlorpyrifos, about the pesticide. And the question is, why does chlorpyrifos, why isn't it just included in the RASF notifications, i.e. with public health impact? Well, I want you to know that chlorpyrifos is now increasingly used by the European Union, but so that it can have an impact on public health, you need to have a level which is higher to the authorized limit of residue detection. And you need to have what we call in English acute doses. And it's only if it reaches that level that we will include it in the RASFF or not. Now, these evaluations are made with the help of EFSA and other European bodies. So I'll give the floor to other speakers and we'll come back to the questions later.
Could you take the one eventually as an example, olive oil, but also the training? So, you know, many people are interested in knowing more, on having a bit of capacity building. How eventually it is also shared with different stakeholders, the cases of fraud, to learn from them, including to smallholders. And I don't know if from your practice you can see that. And anything else you want to add? You have a... Ah, yes, you have Go on, please.
If you want, I can answer to my question. Okay. The short answer is yes, we have some analysis for the origin of olive oil. I say short answer because the problem is a little bit bigger. I mean, in Italy, for the origin and traceability of olive oil, we have a wonderful tool, which is an online register. So for the Italian olive oil and much more for PGO PGI olive oil, we can check all steps and we can know exactly where it is from. But in case of fraud, we are working on another kind of system which consists of isotopic analysis. This kind of analysis is not, how to say, is not legal valid. I don't know exactly how to say in English. I mean, in case of the problems, it's not enough only this analysis, but it must be supported by some documentation, some checks. Okay, so documents and analysis. But for sure, we are working on this, and we already have some cases. Just to remember to everyone, isotopic analysis is based on we collect each year some samples, we make analysis, and we know that this isotopic result is come from that zone, that place. So when we go in the market and make analysis, we make a comparison of these two results, and we find out if it's possible or not. I think it's enough. If there is more, just.
You had something to add regarding your customers, your partners, the training. According to your document, you mentioned that you need a minimum of information, even though you're not an inspector, but certainly you need to have information about food safety. And we know that the private sector and operators already have a great deal of intelligence. And as you mentioned, if the production is greater than the capacity expected, you will conduct some investigation, and that is true about the origin. And as Jose mentioned earlier, a lot of producers find their products in areas they do not export to. So the private sector is already doing a lot. And later on, maybe Mr. Marin could say a few words about the cooperation between the private and the public sector. I don't know whether that's possible. Mr. Dessous, would you like to add anything? Could you tell us if you promote good practices, integrity in companies, etc.?
Absolutely. The partners with whom we're working take that as a starting point. Once we have established the profile of producers, mapped the plots, we will ask questions that will enable us to assess their control or their knowledge of some of the processes and some of the risks. And on that basis, we will supply specific training. If you have to master your supply, limit the risk of fraud from the plot to the company, the plant, and then from the plant to the market. Farmers have to be aware of all those problems, and we have to work on those practices, and we have a tool that's called education, and that aims at making best practices available to farmers Together with the industrial operators, we develop content in the different local languages, and we will disseminate those training sessions through mobile apps, etc. This is something that we have used quite often for the cocoa value chain in the Côte d'Ivoire, and this mobile app will enable them to see content videos and get trained on their own. They have to start getting used to these systems, and we will use the same support to convey messages on practices, explain why when you store your organic cocoa bag next to vats of chemicals, it is questionable, it is not good, and you might then run a risk of error, as the product will be sold as an organic product, and in the subsequent analysis the presence of chemicals will be detected. So this is the type of practices that we are working on. We try to identify the risks and inform and train on those matters. Thank you very much. Mr. Marin is trying to rejoin us because he had got a few connection problems. We have 4 minutes left as to the time we had foreseen to conclude this session. It is only a first step in a discussion that should tackle many more things, many more examples. We've got so many lessons to learn from the experience. I will share all the elements. I see many interventions in the chat. Our colleagues are preparing training sessions. One is being prepared in Kenya, and online we'll inform you about all those initiatives. Don't worry, I've seen several several messages on the chat. You are in our email list, so you will receive all pieces of information. José, would you have something to add? I don't know if Jeremy is still online, but José, I'd like to give you the floor because it is a topic that is of utmost importance for the OECD. If you want to add anything or react as to the...
Thank you, Isolina. Thanks to all our presenters. I think it was a great discussion. We had from Mr. Maran. He explained us how the European Commission operates. You know, the European Commission, the European Union, they have one of the best legal frameworks to fight food fraud. You know, we work with other continents, but Europe is one of the most advanced in fighting food fraud. We had with Dr. Alberino the example of how a European country enforces, the law, those European regulations. So Dr. Alberino gave us concrete examples how he goes and tries to prevent and fight food fraud. And of course, we have Mr. Dosu Soñón from Agrosphere, that his organization proposes tools and solutions for producers, mainly in Africa, on how to facilitate trade and enhance exports, mainly to international markets and Europe mainly. I think food fraud is a global challenge. It affects the small producers all of the way to the consumers. So it's for all of us to try to prevent food fraud. I think for all the producers that are here gathered today, I think our advice will be collaborate with institutes as Agrosphere or any other institute that helps you understand better all the documents, all the rules and regulations that you need to fulfill in order to export to international markets, to provide traceability of your products. That's one of the key elements to fight food fraud. So the traceability is very, very important. And it's in your interest to try to comply with all these regulations, because once there's one case, only one case of food fraud that comes from your country, from your region, this means that inspection authorities in the destination country, they will reinforce checks and controls. And that's not good for you. Even if you are innocent, you have not committed that food fraud, that will cost you money because there will be more inspections to all the products coming from your country, for your product. So that's costly, it takes time, and it affects the reputation. Remember that it's not only you, all your colleagues who produce a certain product. Once you are, have a case of food fraud, it will affect the trust of the consumer in your product, in your country. So it's very, very important that you try to follow all the regulations. Do you address and reach out to people like Mr. Dosu Soñón, or I'm sure there are to COLEAD, they can guide you, how to make sure that you have the right traceability of your product and you gain the trust of national authorities in the destination country and the consumer. I mean, that will help you a lot to increase the benefits of your product, to sell at a higher price once you gain that trust. Otherwise, I mean, it's the opposite. Only one case of food fraud will affect the whole chain and the whole reputation of your country. So I see we're running out of time. Isolina, give you back the floor. Thank you very much.
Just on time. It's just 11:30 for me here. Thank you very much for the very nice summary and really alerting. We will share also trainings, any kind of resources that we will put together from different organizations, of course, not just COLEAD. And but just Mr. Marin, I know he had some problems this morning. Monsieur Marin, si vous avez quelque chose à ajouter, on a vu que vous aviez un petit souci IT. On a fait le petit résumé. José vient d'alerter en fait de l'importance de la fraude alimentaire, de la prendre très au sérieux, de bien collaborer avec les services publics. Bien sûr, nous alertons les opérateurs privés qui ont beaucoup d'informations, d'intelligence entre eux, de produits qui ne devraient pas être là, qui sortent, etc., même s'ils peuvent être fraudeurs eux-mêmes, bien entendu. Mais de vraiment collaborer parce que c'est pas seulement une menace économique et autres, mais c'est aussi un problème de réputation pour l'industrie, le pays. Donc je ne sais pas si vous voulez tout le monde ajouter un petit peu un mot, si vous voulez ajouter de votre côté quelque chose, on a encore quelques minutes.
Écoutez, je pense que vous avez, ce que je viens d'entendre, c'est le résumé absolument parfait.
What I've heard is a perfect
pour moi,
summary of our discussions.
Et on le voit au travers des notifications que vous avez pu voir au sein de notre réseau. Pour l'instant, la plupart des notifications reviennent des autorités compétentes avec les contrôles sur le marché, etc.
Of notifications come from the competent authorities carrying out inspections in the field, but we would need information be transmitted by companies as soon as they detect anomalies or suspicions of fraud. These companies should really inform their authorities anonymously or in a more official way, so that investigation be carried out and to make sure that all operators are able to evolve in an environment that would call of fair competition. This is what is most important for us. This is what you've just said. It is very important for us to get information that companies
Merci beaucoup. Et comme vous l'avez tous souligné et José dans son résumé, en fait, il faut ne pas avoir peur de collaborer avec les organisations publiques ou de répression de fraude. Enfin, c'est tout un dialogue. La communication, l'échange est très, très important parce que tout le monde est intéressé à de meilleures performances, bien entendu, de respectabilité, de confiance, etc. du secteur. Donc voilà, je vous remercie tous beaucoup. C'était vraiment une session très, très intéressante. On veut écouter plus et plus et plus et plus. En tout cas, dans mon cas, j'espère que ça vous a inspiré aussi. Nos panélistes, que je remercie de nouveau, ont eu la gentillesse de partager déjà quelques ressources. Nous consoliderons tout ça dans notre email de suivi. Et bien sûr, c'est le début de nouveau de ces échanges, donc on continuera à vous informer. N'hésitez pas aussi à vous abonner à des ressources, comme celle partagée avec M. Marin, par M. Marin ou d'autres, pour que vous receviez des alertes, ou celle du COLEAD, pour que vous receviez des alertes de manière récurrente, enfin de manière continue. Et alors, je vous dis à la prochaine, bien entendu, à la prochaine session. Je remercie les interprètes, sans qui on n'aurait pas pu avoir cette discussion. Merci beaucoup. Je remercie bien sûr mes collègues, ceux qui sont en ligne, Axel, Arthur, Alison, si vous voulez bien mettre votre caméra, bien entendu, José, Marie et mes collègues du COLEAD, et puis tous mes collègues qui ne sont pas dans le devant de la scène, mais qui ont bien entendu contribué aussi aussi bien du COLEAD que de l'OCDE à cette session. Je vous dis à très bientôt. Je vous remercie. Vous avez notre email pour tout suivi, y compris de contact avec les panélistes ou les participants. Je vous ai dit déjà qu'on a une législation forte sur le système alimentaire et j'en suis très fière, en tout cas personnellement, en Europe. Mais nous avons aussi une législation forte sur le partage des données. On ne partage pas les contacts sans l'autorisation de la personne, mais nous sommes toujours ravis et on n'a jamais un problème. C'est des sessions d'échange pour vous mettre en contact, bien entendu, avec l'autorisation préalable avec d'autres panélistes ou d'autres intervenants. Donc, contactez-nous et si vous voulez être aussi présentateur dans une de nos sessions à venir sur les sujets qui viennent, n'hésitez pas à nous contacter et à partager en tout cas votre expertise, ça sera un plaisir. Merci beaucoup. Merci José de nouveau.
Thank you, José.
Bye bye. Keep well.
Bye-bye.